Greedy son sent his parents to a nursing home. But karma came back for him. Hi everyone. Before we get into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel's reach has been dropping a bit, and one of the best ways you can support us is by subscribing. It's quick, free, and helps us keep bringing you new and interesting stories. Your support means the world to us, and together we can grow this channel. Thank you so much. Now let's get to today's story. I'm writing from a temporary account for obvious reasons, and I've changed some details to protect my anonymity. I'm writing this down because someone needs to know the truth. Someone needs to understand what really happened to the Henderson family. My name is Margaret Winters, and I was their neighbor for 37 years. I watched it all unfold, from the beginning to the bitter end. The Hendersons moved to Maple Street in 1987, when their boy Marcus was just 8 years old. Robert worked double shifts at the steel mill, his hands perpetually stained with grease and oil, while Elena cleaned houses for the wealthy folks on the other side of town. I remember the smell of her homemade bread wafting through their kitchen window every Sunday morning, and how she'd always bring a loaf over to us newcomers. Those early years were golden for that family. Robert would come home exhausted, his work boots heavy on their front porch, but the moment Marcus ran to greet him, his whole face would light up. Elena would have dinner ready. Nothing fancy, mind you, but the kind of food that fills your belly and your heart. Meatloaf on Mondays, spaghetti on Wednesdays, and always that bread on Sundays. Marcus was their everything. I'd see them through my kitchen window, Robert teaching the boy how to throw a baseball in their tiny backyard, Elena helping him with homework at their kitchen table under that old yellow light. When Marcus needed glasses in 4th grade, Elena took on extra cleaning jobs. When he wanted to play Little League, Robert sold his fishing gear to pay for the equipment. That boy's going to college, Elena used to tell me over our shared fence. He's going to have everything we never had. And they made sure he did. When Marcus showed an interest in computers, this was back when they were still expensive luxuries, Robert worked Christmas overtime for 3 months straight to buy him one. I watched them carry that heavy box up their front steps, both of them grinning like they'd won the lottery. Marcus was 12 then, and he hugged them so tight I thought he might crack their ribs. Elena saved every penny from her cleaning jobs in a mason jar hidden behind their flour canister. I know because she told me, swearing me to secrecy. "It's for Marcus's college," she'd whisper, as if speaking too loudly might make the money disappear. By the time he graduated high school, that jar held over $15,000. $15,000 earned $1 bill at a time, scrubbing other people's toilets and washing other people's dishes. Robert's back gave out when Marcus was a junior in high school. 3 decades of lifting steel beams and working in awkward positions finally caught up with him. But did they touch that college fund? Not a chance. Instead, Elena took on more houses, working 7 days a week, coming home with her knees swollen and her hands raw from chemicals. I used to see her through their living room window, sitting with Marcus at night, helping him fill out college applications. She'd moved her reading glasses up and down her nose, squinting at the forms, determined to help even though half the words were foreign to her. Robert would sit in his recliner nearby, his heating pad wrapped around his lower back, but his eyes never left his son. Marcus got into State University with a partial scholarship. The day that acceptance letter came, Elena cried for an hour straight. Happy tears, of course, but also tears of relief. They'd done it. Their boy was going to college. The first year was hard on them financially. Even with the scholarship, there were expenses: books, supplies, a meal plan, dormitory fees. Elena sold her grandmother's wedding ring, the only valuable thing she owned, to help cover costs. When I asked her about it, she just shrugged. Marcus needs it more than I need jewelry. But something started changing during those college years. Marcus came home less frequently, and when he did, he seemed different, distant. He'd grown his hair out and started wearing clothes that cost more than Robert made in a week. He'd roll his eyes when Elena tried to serve him her meatloaf, claiming he'd developed more sophisticated tastes. "Where's he getting money for those fancy clothes?" I asked Elena one day. She looked uncomfortable. "He's got a part-time job. Good for him, learning responsibility." But I knew Robert was still sending money every month. I'd see him walking to the post office with those envelopes, his gait slower now due to his worsening back problems. By Marcus's junior year, the changes were impossible to ignore. He brought a girlfriend home for Thanksgiving, a pretty blonde girl named Stephanie who looked around their modest home like she was afraid she might catch something. She picked at Elena's carefully prepared turkey dinner and made comments about how quaint everything was. "Marcus tells me you clean houses," Stephanie said to Elena during dessert, her tone suggesting she might have been discussing sewage work. Elena's face reddened, but she nodded. "Yes, I do. Good, honest work." "Oh, absolutely," Stephanie replied with a plastic smile. "It's so important to have, service people." I wanted to march over there and tell that little princess that Elena's service was putting her boyfriend through college, but Robert caught my eye through the window and shook his head slightly. He knew what I was thinking. Marcus said nothing during this exchange, just sat there eating his mother's pie and letting his girlfriend insult the woman who'd sacrificed everything for him. After graduation, Marcus got a job at a tech company in the city. Good money, benefits, the whole package. Robert and Elena were so proud they could barely contain themselves. Elena made a special dinner to celebrate, inviting me and my husband over to share in their joy. "Our boy made it," Robert kept saying, his eyes wet with tears. Our boy really made it. But success changed Marcus in ways that should have worried them. He moved to an expensive apartment downtown, started driving a BMW, joined a country club. When Elena asked how he could afford all this on his starting salary, he'd laugh and say something about leveraging opportunities and maximizing potential. The visits home became even less frequent. Christmas, maybe Easter if they were lucky. When he did come, he'd spend most of his time on his phone, talking about deals and clients and profit margins. Elena would cook his favorite meals, but he'd barely touch them, claiming he was watching his diet or had developed food sensitivities. I remember one particularly painful dinner I witnessed through their window. Elena had spent all day making homemade ravioli, Marcus's childhood favorite. She'd rolled the pasta by hand, just like her Italian grandmother had taught her. But when she served it, Marcus took one bite and pushed the plate away. "Mom, this is way too heavy. I'm trying to eat clean now. Don't you have any quinoa or kale?" Elena's face fell. I could make you a salad?" "Never mind, I'll just eat when I get back to the city." Robert's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Elena quietly cleared the untouched plate, and I saw her scraping that beautiful homemade ravioli into the garbage disposal. My heart broke for her. The years passed, and Marcus climbed the corporate ladder. He married Stephanie in an elaborate ceremony that cost more than Robert and Elena's annual income. They weren't involved in the planning. Stephanie's parents handled everything, making it clear that the Hendersons' input wasn't needed or wanted. I watched Elena try on dress after dress at the discount store, looking for something appropriate for her son's wedding. She finally settled on a navy blue dress that was elegant but modest. When she showed it to Marcus, he frowned. "Mom, maybe something a little more modern?" Stephanie's friends will be there, and her parents are pretty fashion conscious. Elena returned the dress and spent money she didn't have on something more expensive, something that made her look uncomfortable and unlike herself. At the wedding, she and Robert sat at a table in the back, surrounded by people they didn't know, eating food they couldn't pronounce. Marcus and Stephanie bought a house in the suburbs, not the modest suburbs where Marcus grew up, but the kind with gates and security guards and 6-car garages. They had 2 children, Brandon and Ashley, beautiful kids who barely knew their paternal grandparents existed. Robert's health was declining steadily by then. Years of hard labor had taken their toll, and he needed a walker to get around. Elena, now in her late 60s, was still cleaning houses, though arthritis made every movement painful. They'd never had much in the way of retirement savings. Every penny had gone toward Marcus's future. I suggested they ask Marcus for help. They were his parents, after all, and he was clearly doing well for himself. Elena shook her head. "We don't want to be a burden. He's got his own family to worry about." But they weren't asking for much, just maybe some help with Robert's medical bills, or for Marcus to hire someone to help with the heavy housework Elena could no longer manage. Basic things. The kind of help you'd expect from a son whose parents had given him everything. When Robert had his first heart attack at 72, Marcus visited the hospital exactly once. He stayed for maybe an hour, pacing around the room like he had somewhere better to be, checking his phone constantly. When Elena tried to explain the doctor's concerns about Robert's ongoing care needs, Marcus cut her off. "Look, Mom, I'm sure everything will be fine. Dad's tough. He'll bounce back." But Robert didn't bounce back. Not really. The heart attack left him weak and confused. Some days he'd forget things, where he put his keys, what day it was, sometimes even Elena's name. Elena became his full-time caregiver while still trying to work enough to keep their bills paid. I offered to help however I could, but Elena was proud. "We'll manage," she'd insist, even as I watched her grow thinner and more exhausted by the day. The second heart attack came 18 months later. This one landed Robert in the ICU for 2 weeks. Elena never left his side, sleeping in uncomfortable hospital chairs, eating vending machine food, wearing the same clothes for days at a time. Marcus showed up on day 3, looking annoyed. "Mom, you can't just live at the hospital. It's not healthy." "He's my husband," Elena replied, her voice hoarse from exhaustion and worry. "Where else would I be? You need to be realistic about this. Dad's not getting better. Maybe it's time to consider other options." Even then, Elena didn't understand what he was suggesting. She thought he meant bringing in a home health aide or maybe modifying the house to make it more accessible. She started talking about the possibilities, about how they could manage Robert's care at home. Marcus wasn't listening. He was looking at his phone again, probably calculating how much this was all going to cost. Robert survived that heart attack too, but he came home requiring round-the-clock care. Elena quit her cleaning jobs. She couldn't leave him alone anymore. Their savings, what little they had, evaporated quickly. Medical bills piled up on their kitchen table, a mountain of debt that grew higher every week. That's when Marcus made his move. I was in my garden when I saw his BMW pull into their driveway. He'd brought Stephanie and the kids, unusual for a weekday visit. Through their kitchen window, I could see Elena rushing around, trying to tidy up, thrilled to see her grandchildren. The conversation started pleasant enough. Marcus helped himself to Elena's coffee. The kids played in the living room. Stephanie scrolled through her phone. But then Marcus cleared his throat in that way that meant business was about to be discussed. "Mom, Dad, we need to talk about your situation here." Elena looked up from the cookies she was arranging on a plate. "What do you mean, honey?" "This whole setup. Dad's condition, your inability to work, the mounting bills. It's not sustainable." Robert, who'd been dozing in his chair, opened his eyes. His mind was clearer that day, one of his good days. "What are you getting at, son?" Marcus pulled out a folder of paperwork. "I've been doing some research. There are some really nice facilities that specialize in this kind of care. Professional staff, medical equipment, activities for seniors. It would be so much better for both of you." The silence in that kitchen was deafening. I could see Elena's face through the window, the way her expression changed from confusion to dawning horror. "You want to put us in a home?" Robert said quietly. "It's not putting you anywhere, Dad. It's finding you the best possible care. You need more help than Mom can provide, and she needs to be able to live her life too." "This is our life," Elena whispered. "This house, our memories, our things. This is our life." Marcus sighed like they were being difficult children. "Mom, be practical. You can't take care of Dad properly here. What if he falls and you can't help him up? What if he has another heart attack and you're alone? In a facility, there would be nurses available 24/7. "I've been taking care of your father for 46 years, Elena said, her voice growing stronger. "I think I know how to do it." "That's not the point. The point is efficiency, cost-effectiveness, quality of care." Stephanie looked up from her phone. "Plus, you guys would meet people your own age. Make friends. It would be like a constant social club." Elena stared at her daughter-in-law like she was speaking a foreign language. "I don't need to make friends. I have friends. I have my neighbors, my church, my community. Mom, Marcus said, his patience clearly wearing thin. You're being emotional instead of logical. I've already visited 3 facilities, and Sunset Manor is absolutely beautiful. They have a garden, organized activities, movie nights. You'd love it. I'd love staying in my own home with my husband. Elena snapped back. The argument continued for over an hour. I could hear their voices rising and falling, could see the gestures and body language through the window. Marcus presented his case like a business proposal, charts and costs and optimal outcomes. Elena and Robert fought like people defending their lives, which is exactly what they were doing. Finally, Marcus played his trump card. Look, I've already talked to a lawyer. Given Dad's medical condition and your financial situation, I can petition for guardianship if necessary. But I'd rather do this cooperatively. The threat hung in the air like poison gas. Elena's face went white. Robert struggled to stand up, his walker clanking against the table. You'd force us out of our own home? Robert asked, his voice shaking with anger and disbelief. I'd do whatever it takes to ensure you get proper care, Marcus replied coolly, even if you're too stubborn to see that it's for your own good. That's when Elena started crying. Not the quiet tears she'd shed over Marcus's childhood disappointments or his growing distance over the years. These were the deep, wrenching sobs of a woman watching her world collapse. We gave you everything, she choked out between sobs. Everything we had, everything we were, we gave to you. And this is how you repay us? Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. This isn't about repayment, Mom. This is about practical solutions to a practical problem. We are not a problem to be solved, Robert shouted, his face red with exertion and fury. We are your parents. The kids had stopped playing and were staring at their grandparents with wide, confused eyes. Stephanie quickly ushered them outside to the backyard, away from the ugly scene unfolding in the kitchen. You know what the real problem is? Elena said, wiping her eyes with the dish towel. The problem is that having sick old parents doesn't fit into your perfect life. We're an embarrassment to you. That's not true. Isn't it? When's the last time you brought the kids to visit? When's the last time you included us in anything? We don't even get Christmas dinner anymore because Stephanie thinks our house is too small for entertaining. Marcus looked genuinely surprised, like he'd never considered any of this. Mom, we've been busy. The company's expanding. The kids have activities. Stephanie has her charity work. Everyone's too busy for the people who made it all possible, Robert said quietly. Too busy for the people who worked themselves into the ground so you could have your fancy education, and your fancy job, and your fancy life. The conversation ended with Marcus storming out, leaving his parents shaken and terrified. But he'd made his intentions clear. One way or another, they were going to that nursing home. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus launched what I can only describe as a campaign of psychological warfare. He'd show up unannounced, pointing out every small thing that went wrong in their daily routine. When Robert got confused about taking his medication, Marcus was there to document it. When Elena struggled to help Robert to the bathroom, Marcus suggested she could injure herself or him. When their neighbor brought them groceries because Elena couldn't leave Robert alone, Marcus framed it as evidence that they were becoming dependent on others. He brought Stephanie for backup, and she had plenty to say about the unsanitary conditions and unsafe environment. Their house wasn't dirty. Elena was still as meticulous as her arthritis allowed, but it was old, and it showed the wear and tear of decades of hard living. Look at this carpet, Stephanie would say, pointing to a worn spot in the hallway. That's a tripping hazard. And these stairs to the basement, what if your father falls? Elena tried to defend their home, but Marcus and Stephanie had an answer for everything. The bathtub was too high to step into safely. The kitchen was too small for a wheelchair if Robert needed one. The neighborhood was declining and might not be safe for elderly people living alone. They wore Elena down systematically, professionally, like lawyers building a case. And maybe that's exactly what they were doing. The breaking point came when Robert had what Elena thought was another heart attack. She called 911, terrified and shaking. It turned out to be severe heartburn, but but the paramedics who responded were young and condescending, treating Elena like she was hysterical and incompetent. Marcus somehow heard about the incident within hours. He showed up with more paperwork. "This proves my point exactly," he said, spreading documents across their kitchen table. "You can't tell the difference between a medical emergency and indigestion. What if you make the wrong decision when it really matters?" Elena was exhausted from the constant pressure, the constant criticism, the constant fear. Robert was having more bad days than good ones, and she was struggling to care for him while defending their right to stay in their own home. Maybe he's right," Robert said one evening after Marcus had left. "Maybe I am too much for you to handle." "Don't you dare," Elena said fiercely. "Don't you dare let him convince you that love is a burden." But the damage was done. Marcus had planted seeds of doubt and watered them with fear. Within a month, Elena had signed the papers. I watched them pack their lives into cardboard boxes, keeping only what would fit in a single room at Sunset Manor. Elena cried over every item they had to leave behind. Robert's tools, her kitchen gadgets, photo albums, books, the furniture they'd saved up to buy piece by piece over the decades. Marcus hired a cleaning service to empty the house and put it on the market. He didn't ask his parents if they wanted to keep anything else. He didn't offer to store their belongings. Everything they couldn't take with them went to charity or the dump. The day they moved to Sunset Manor, I helped Elena pack a small suitcase with her most precious possessions. A photo from their wedding day, Robert's Purple Heart from Vietnam, the mason jar she'd used to save for Marcus's college education. Now empty but still meaningful to her. "I don't know how I raised such a cold man," she whispered to me as we wrapped her grandmother's china in newspaper. "Where did I go wrong?" "You didn't go wrong, honey," I told her. "You loved him too much, maybe, but that's not wrong. That's just heartbreaking." Marcus sold their house within 3 months. The new owners tore it down and built a McMansion that takes up every inch of the lot. 46 years of marriage, of family dinners and birthday parties and Christmas mornings, reduced to nothing but dirt and a new foundation. Elena and Robert tried to adjust to life at Sunset Manor, but it was like trying to transplant ancient trees. They withered in that sterile environment, surrounded by strangers and institutional furniture and the constant smell of disinfectant. Robert died 6 months later. The official cause was another heart attack, but I think he died of a broken heart. Elena was convinced he gave up, and maybe she was right. Maybe he decided that a world where sons abandoned their parents wasn't worth fighting for anymore. Marcus came to the funeral in his expensive black suit, playing the grieving son for the handful of people who attended. He gave a speech about Robert's legacy and the values he instilled, words that rang hollow coming from the mouth of the man who discarded his father like outdated furniture. Elena moved in with her sister in Arizona after Robert's death. She couldn't stand being at Sunset Manor anymore, couldn't stand the memories of watching her husband fade away in that terrible place. Before she left, she gave me something, a letter she'd written but never sent to Marcus. "Maybe someday he'll want to understand what he did to us," she said. "Maybe when he's old and his own children are deciding what to do with him." I kept that letter for 5 years, and then karma came calling. It started with Marcus's business. The tech company he'd worked for went through a round of layoffs, and despite his years of service and apparent success, Marcus found himself without a job. The economy was tough, and finding equivalent employment wasn't as easy as he'd expected. Stephanie, it turned out, had expensive tastes that didn't adjust well to reduced circumstances. The country club membership was the first thing to go, followed by the BMW lease and the private schools for the kids. Marcus took a job with a smaller company at significantly less pay, but Stephanie wasn't happy about the lifestyle changes. The marriage began to crack under financial pressure. Stephanie had married Marcus for his earning potential and the comfortable life he could provide. When that life became less comfortable, her commitment began to waver. I learned all this from my new neighbors. Marcus had moved back to his childhood neighborhood after selling the big house. He'd bought a modest ranch home 3 streets over, close enough that I'd see him at the grocery store or the gas station. He always looked stressed, tired, older than his 41 years. The divorce was nasty. Stephanie fought for everything: the remaining assets, custody of the children, alimony that would maintain her standard of living. Marcus found himself paying for 2 households while earning less than he had in years. But the real karma was yet to come. Brandon and Ashley, now teenagers, had absorbed their mother's values about money and status. When Marcus couldn't afford the expensive gadgets and designer clothes they were accustomed to, they began to see him as a failure. When his small apartment couldn't compete with Stephanie's new boyfriend's suburban palace, they chose to spend less and less time with their father. Marcus tried to maintain relationships with his children, but he'd never learned how to connect with them beyond material provision. He'd been too busy building his career when they were young, too focused on success to develop the kind of emotional bonds that survive financial hardship. The kids grew cold toward him, just as he'd grown cold toward his parents. They'd roll their eyes at his attempts to interest them in modest activities, preferring the expensive entertainment their mother's new boyfriend could provide. They'd make excuses to avoid weekends at his apartment, claiming they had plans with friends or school activities. Sound familiar? Marcus tried to win them back the only way he knew how, by spending money he didn't have. He'd take them to expensive restaurants, buy them things they wanted, plan elaborate outings that left him struggling to pay rent. But children who've been raised to value only what money can buy aren't satisfied with gestures. They want the real thing, consistently and without effort. When Marcus lost his second job due to company downsizing, the kids stopped visiting altogether. Stephanie made it clear that she didn't want them exposed to financial instability and convinced the court to modify the custody arrangement. Marcus went from seeing his children every other weekend to supervised visits once a month. He tried to fight it, but legal battles cost money he didn't have. His lawyer was court-appointed, overworked, and underpaid. Stephanie's attorney was expensive and ruthless. The outcome was predictable. By this time, Marcus was working 2 part-time jobs, one at an electronics store, another doing freelance IT work. He'd moved to an even smaller apartment, a studio in a complex that had seen better days. His BMW had been replaced by a 10-year-old Honda with a cracked windshield and a tendency to stall at red lights. The irony wasn't lost on me. Marcus had spent his adult life climbing toward success, defining himself by his income and possessions and status. Now, all of that was gone, and he was discovering what his parents had learned long ago, that when you strip away everything else, all you really have is the people who love you. Except Marcus had thrown those people away. I started seeing him at the grocery store late at night, shopping with coupons and buying generic brands. He'd lost weight, and his clothes hung loose on his frame. His hair was going gray at the temples, and he had the hollow-eyed look of someone who wasn't sleeping well. One evening, I ran into him in the frozen food aisle. He was studying the prices on TV dinners, the kind of cheap processed meals Elena would have been horrified to serve her family. He looked up and recognized me. "Mrs. Winters," he said, forcing a smile. "How are you?" "I'm doing well, Marcus. How are you holding up?" The smile faltered. "Oh, you know, changes. Life changes." I wanted to ask about Elena, whether he'd tried to contact her after Robert's death, whether he understood now what he'd done to them. But looking at him standing there with his cart full of frozen dinners and store-brand coffee, I realized he was already living his punishment. "Your parents were good people," I said instead. Marcus's face went pale. Yes, they were. Your mother used to worry about you, you know, even after. Everything. She'd wonder if you were happy, if you were eating enough, if you were taking care of yourself. Marcus's hands tightened on his shopping cart. I thought I was doing the right thing. For everyone. The right thing for who? He didn't have an answer for that. We stood there in the fluorescent glow of the frozen food aisle, 2 people who'd watched the same family story unfold from different perspectives. "She's in Arizona now," I told him. "Your mother, living with her sister. She's not doing well." Marcus nodded but didn't ask for details. Maybe he was afraid to know. Maybe he was afraid Elena wouldn't want to hear from him. Or maybe he was just afraid. I left him there among the frozen dinners and went home to my husband, my comfortable house, my intact family. but I couldn't stop thinking about that conversation, about the hollow look in Marcus's eyes. 6 months later, I heard from Elena's sister. Elena had passed away in her sleep, peacefully, surrounded by family who loved her. There was no mention of Marcus at the funeral. I don't know if anyone even told him she was gone. Marcus disappeared from the neighborhood not long after that. Someone said he'd moved across the country for a job opportunity. Someone else heard he'd gone to live with a cousin in Florida. The truth is, nobody really knew or cared enough to find out. The house on Maple Street where Marcus grew up was eventually torn down too, replaced by another oversized modern home. Sometimes I drive by and try to remember what it looked like when Robert was teaching Marcus to throw a baseball in the backyard, when Elena was baking bread on Sunday mornings, when they were a family that believed love and sacrifice could build something lasting. But that world is gone now, erased as completely as if it never existed. I think about Marcus sometimes, wherever he is. I wonder if he ever thinks about that mason jar full of dollar bills, saved one at a time by a woman who cleaned other people's houses so her son could have a better life. I wonder if he remembers the smell of his mother's bread, or the pride in his father's eyes when he graduated from college. I wonder if he understands now that some things, once broken, can never be repaired. The lesson in all of this, if there is one, isn't that bad people get punished and good people get rewarded. Life isn't that simple or fair. Robert and Elena suffered for their son's choices, dying in sadness and disappointment despite their decades of love and sacrifice. No, the lesson is simpler and more terrible than that. The lesson is that we become what we choose to value. Marcus chose money over love, convenience over commitment, success over family. And in the end, those choices shaped not just what he did, but who he was. He got exactly what he valued, for a while. And when he lost it all, he discovered that the things he'd discarded in pursuit of success were the only things that could have sustained him through failure. His parents had known that all along. They'd built their lives on love and loyalty and the belief that family means something deeper than bloodlines. They'd have given anything for their son. And they did give everything, right up until the moment he decided it wasn't enough. Now Marcus has nothing. And no one. And somewhere in Arizona, there's a grave marker with Elena's name on it, visited by people who understood what love really means. The karma wasn't punishment from the universe. It was simply the natural consequence of a man who learned to see people as problems to be solved rather than hearts to be treasured. When his own life became a problem, he discovered that the people who might have helped him solve it were gone, not because they'd stopped loving him, but because he'd trained himself to stop believing that love was worth anything at all. And that, perhaps, is the cruelest karma of all. Not that Marcus lost everything he thought he wanted, but that he'd already lost everything that could have saved him, and he'd thrown it away with his own 2 hands.